So we're picking up in the 5th chapter of Maaser Sheni, and we're dealing with what the Mishnah calls biur. We're dealing with removal, with getting rid of stuff, with getting rid of Maaser, which is hanging around in the house. And we read this beautiful verse on Shabbat. When you finish tithing everything in the 3rd year, and you give to the Levi and the ger, that you give to the Levi and the stranger and the orphan and the widow, and they eat in your gates and they're satisfied. And then you say, you make this declaration. This is a declaration. This is a declaration we make in Jerusalem. Biarti kodesh min habayit. I have removed all of the hallowed things out of my house. And also, also I've given them to the Levi and the stranger and the orphan and the widow. According to all commandments that you've given me. I haven't transgressed and I haven't forgotten. So this is the biur. This is getting rid of any tithes which are still hanging around in the house at the end of the 3rd year. I suppose you could say it's setting the slate clean. It's making sure that anything that has to be given out is given out. So when we go up to Jerusalem at the Pilgrim Festival, we can make this declaration. The Mishnah is going to describe how we're going to do that. And it actually begins with the timing. Erev Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. So we're going to do this today before Pesach. That's really interesting because we know that the 7th year cycle runs from Tishri, not from Pesach. Although, by the way, the cycles of calculation of Maaser, well, we to them in the first Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah, and they're very different. For trees, it will be Shavat, which is just it's just 6 weeks before Nisan. So the cycle of calculation of tithes is different from the regular cycle of Nisan or Tishri for New Year's. But what seems to be going on here is that we need a certain amount of time after the end of those cycles in order to be sure that we've given everything out and distributed anything, so that we were ready. When it comes down to Pesach, in the 4th year. So this is the 4th year of the cycle. At that point, we're ready to do the biur. So the 3rd year and the 6th year are the years when we give away Maaser Ani. And then when we get halfway through the 4th year, we get ready to make this declaration. How do we do it? Keitzad haya biur. How do you get ready to get the stuff out of your house? Well, notnim truma utrumat maaser. We give truma and trumat maaser. Remember that let's go back to our chart. We come back to this a lot. The truma is between 1.5% and 2.5%. The maaser rishon is given to Levi'im. Trumat maaser, the Levi'im separate 10% of the 10% for the priests. And then the Maaser Sheni is another 10%, or Maaser Ani in years 3 and 6. So we're going to give the Truma and the Trumat Maaser to their owners. That's the Kohanim. Maaser Rishon Livalim. And so we're going to give the Maaser Rishon to the Levi'im. Maaser Ani Levalav. And we're going to give the poor person's Maaser to their owners. And the Maaser Sheni and the first fruits are then, anything we've got left over in our house is then removed and handed out. And Rabbi Shimon says, look, the Bikurim are given over to Kohanim because they're just like Truma. What if some of the produce which is left in the house has been cooked? Yeah, so maybe you have Maaser Rishon sitting in your house, or Maaser Sheni sitting in your house, but it's mixed up in a cooked dish. Beit Shammai, Beit Shammai are generally strict. And Beit Shammai are going to say, Sarich levaer, you have to get rid of the whole dish. And Beit Hillel, as you can expect, say, Harehu kimuvuar, it's as if it has been removed, i.e., it's dissipated in whatever the majority of that cooked dish is, we can ignore it. Now, how does that work after the destruction of the temple? That was one of the questions which Jeff asked a couple of days ago. And the Mishnah is going to say very clearly, Misha hayulo perot bazman hazeh, someone who had fruit at this time. And at this time is the time when the temple is no longer available. Vehigiash atabir, and the time for removals arrived. So Beit Shammai are going to say, Sarich lechalan al hakesef, you've just got to convert it all for money. Perhaps the temple will be rebuilt at a certain point. And at that point, you can bring the money up to Jerusalem. And Beit Hillel, again, they're going to be more relaxed. Beit Hillel omrim, echad shehen kesef ve'echad shehen perot. If we can't bring the fruit up to Jerusalem, well, we're just going to have to let it rot because we can't consume it outside Jerusalem, so there's nothing else we can do with it. And the Mishnah continues, but now, of course, we're setting the clock back, right, to when the temple did stand. Rabbi Yehuda remembers, in the early times, this is when the temple did stand, they used to message householders in the provinces. Maharu vehatkinu et perotechem ad shelo tagia shatabiyot. Hasten to set right your produce. Get everything straight before the time of removal comes. So they used to give people early warning. The time of removal is coming. It's coming up to halfway through the 4th year. You need to get everything out of your house. All your produce. And the Mishnah then continues, Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came along. By the way, Rabbi Akiva is after the destruction of the temples. There's a really interesting transformation of time. There's a sort of anachronism of time here that we are in the time when the temple stood, but practically we're quoting a sage who is teaching after the temple has been destroyed. It's an incredibly interesting juxtaposition, if you like, of different times into one Mishnah. And he came and he taught Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva velimed shekol haperot shelo ba'u le'onat hamasrot puturim min habiyur. Anything that hasn't reached the time of tithing is exempt from the removal. And we learned this idea when we learned about Maaserot. We learned that every type of food becomes eligible for tithing when it becomes ready to eat. That was one of the principles. If it's not ready to eat, then it can't be tithed. So produce which is in some kind of unripe state on the trees, if it's not possible to eat it, then it's not eligible for tithing at all. And Rabbi Akiva is saying, okay, if it's not eligible for tithing, it's not eligible for removal. So we don't need to remove that. And that's how the 8th Mishnah closes. And then as the rest of the chapter develops, we see more about the removal and more about how we articulate and how we ensure that we are consistent with the declaration that we're going to make in Jerusalem. The declaration actually that we heard read in Shul on Shabbat at the beginning of the Parsha of Kitavo. So we'll explore those ideas in the following couple of days as we close off the 5th chapter and close off indeed the Masechet of Maaser Sheni.